They thought she was just another black woman they could intimidate. Guns drawn, orders barked, her niece screaming beside her. But in 5 heartbeats, the roles reversed. She wasn't ordinary. She was Delta Force. And when the smoke cleared, the question lingered. Who really hunts whom now? Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The soil was dark and cool against Sarah Vance's hands. She pressed her fingers into the earth with practiced care, firm enough to guide but never to crush. The tomato seedlings trembled slightly as she steadied their roots. Then she brushed a layer of soil across them with the gentleness of someone who understood life at its most fragile. Sunlight stretched across her small backyard, glinting against the beads of sweat on her forehead. This garden had become her sanctuary, each row of vegetables a declaration that she had chosen peace over violence. For a long time, she hadn't believed peace was possible. Her body carried memories like scars, screams in foreign languages, the deafening crack of rifles, the hollow eyes of children who would never laugh again. Hands that once pulled triggers now cradled vines, coaxing life from dirt. It was a contradiction she wrestled with daily, yet as she stood among the raised beds lined with cucumbers, beans, and herbs, she felt a sense of control, of order. The same discipline that had once served her in combat now kept weeds from creeping across her rows. From across the fence came the voice of Mrs. Johnson, her neighbor, a woman who carried herself with the fragile strength of age. "Those tomatoes looking good, Sarah," she called, shading her eyes with a wrinkled hand. Sarah rose slowly, stretching her back. She wiped the dirt on her faded jeans before answering. "Yes, ma'am. Should be a strong crop this summer. I'll bring you some when they're ripe." Mrs. Johnson's face softened into a smile. "That does my heart good. Reminds me of the old days when every yard had a victory garden, back when neighbors fed neighbors." Sarah nodded, her own smile brief but genuine. She knew the old woman's words carried a deeper meaning. This neighborhood had seen change, some families forced out, others ground down by hardship. But those who remained held to a stubborn sense of community. Sarah had come to value that more than she ever thought possible. Turning back to her plants, she adjusted the thin stalk of a cucumber vine, guiding it toward the trellis. Her touch was firm, precise. She had always been precise. The irony wasn't lost on her. These were the same hands that once steadied rifles and calculated trigger squeezes to the millisecond. Now they supported tender shoots, their only mission to climb toward the sun. A breeze stirred through the yard, brushing her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the sound of leaves replace the phantom roar of helicopter blades that still haunted her dreams. Here, in this patch of earth, she could almost believe the past no longer owned her. Almost. Later that afternoon, Sarah moved inside, her movements quiet and efficient. In the kitchen, she scrubbed her hands beneath the faucet until the dirt lifted free, the water running clear. She caught her reflection in the window above the sink. The lines around her eyes were deeper now, streaks of gray running through her dark hair, but her posture remained upright, her shoulders square. Some habits refused to leave her body, no matter how many years separated her from her service days. She dried her hands and stepped into the hallway. By the door, 3 keys hung neatly on a hook. The house key, the truck key, the garden shed key. Each had its place just as everything else in the house did. Her toolbox was arranged with near military precision. Even the old gardening gloves she had just used were brushed clean and hung in their spot. People might call it compulsive. For Sarah, it was survival. Order kept her steady. Her phone buzzed and she checked the screen. A reminder popped up. Pick up Maya from school. She allowed herself a small smile. Her niece was the reason she fought for this new life, the reason she refused to let her past dictate her future. Maya had lost her mother, Sarah's sister, to cancer years before, and Sarah had promised then to give her niece something resembling normalcy. No more violence, no more running. A home, a family. Stepping onto the porch, she paused to listen to the soft creak of the screen door. Another mental note: oil the hinges. The old pickup truck sat in the driveway, its paint faded to a dusty blue but still reliable. She had chosen that truck on purpose. Nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention, just a vehicle to get her where she needed to go. Sliding into the driver's seat, Sarah turned the ignition and the engine came alive with its familiar growl. She eased out of the driveway, waving at Mr. Washington, 2 houses down, who was watering his lawn. He waved back. The exchange simple, ordinary. These were the moments Sarah clung to. Small connections, the quiet rhythm of neighborhood life. When she reached the high school, students were pouring from the front doors. Sarah spotted Maya easily, the bright yellow backpack bouncing with each step, the braids swinging as she hurried toward the truck. Maya's face lit up when she saw her aunt. "Auntie!" Maya climbed in, tossing her backpack into the back seat. She buckled her seatbelt, wrinkling her nose. "You smell like dirt again." "That's the smell of honest work," Sarah replied, smiling as she pulled into traffic. "Unlike that chemistry test you had today." Maya groaned dramatically, slumping in her seat. "Can we not talk about it? Total disaster." "Then maybe we should talk about dinner. I was thinking spicy chicken stir-fry, with the snap peas from the garden." Maya perked up instantly. "Really? With the snap peas?" "It depends on how bad that chemistry test was." "No fair. I studied, I swear. The teacher just makes everything impossible." Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. This was what she had promised: a normal day, ordinary problems, laughter between errands. She clung to that thought as she turned onto Maple Street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Sarah guided the truck through the familiar neighborhood streets. Children were playing in a yard a few houses down, their laughter cutting across the low hum of traffic. Somewhere, a lawnmower droned. To anyone else, it was an unremarkable afternoon. To Sarah, it was a kind of peace she had once believed she would never know. Maya had pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages with the intensity only teenagers could summon. Sarah glanced at her, amused, before focusing back on the road. She kept her hands at 10 and 2, her posture upright. Driving had always been more than transportation. It was vigilance, situational awareness. She checked her mirrors often, scanning the rhythm of traffic around her. Old instincts didn't fade. Maya's voice cut through the quiet. "Auntie, there's a police car behind us." Sarah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A tactical cruiser had appeared, following close. Too close. She kept her tone steady. "It's fine. Stay calm." The cruiser didn't back off. Its grille filled her mirror, the red and blue bar faintly catching the sunlight, though the lights remained off. Her pulse quickened, but her movements remained deliberate. She maintained her speed, exactly at the limit, her posture sharpening unconsciously. Maya shifted in her seat. "They're really close, like right on us." Sarah's jaw tightened. Hands where they can see them, just in case. The words slipped out before she could stop them, a reflex drilled into her long ago. She saw Maya glance sideways at her, catching the flicker of tension in her aunt's eyes. The girl's phone lowered slowly, her screen darkening as unease replaced distraction. Sarah's mind ticked through options, calculating, assessing. Nothing about this felt like coincidence. They were less than 3 blocks from home, and the cruiser had appeared suddenly, too deliberate in its tailing. She inhaled slowly, forcing her heart to steady. Not here, not now. She needed to project calm, for Maya's sake. But beneath her calm exterior, the weight of old instincts pressed down. Years of combat training whispered to her, threat assessment, escape routes, probabilities. She had tried so hard to bury that voice, to replace it with soil, seedlings, and community, yet as the cruiser's lights suddenly flared to life in her mirror, painting the world in red and blue, Sarah knew the past wasn't finished with her. She guided the truck smoothly to the side of the road, stopping beneath the long shadow of the abandoned Thompson house. Her hands returned to the wheel, steady, visible. For Maya's sake, she kept her voice even. "It's just a stop," she said quietly, though she knew better. "Stay calm. Don't say anything unless you have to." Beside her, Maya swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her phone. The light from the cruiser bathed the cab of the truck in red and blue pulses, shadows flickering across Sarah's face. The peace of the garden seemed a lifetime away. The patrol cruiser idled behind Sarah's truck, its red and blue lights casting fractured colors across the cracked paint of the old Thompson house. Sarah kept her hands on the steering wheel, her knuckles loose but her posture unnaturally still. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. Maya sat rigid in the passenger seat, eyes darting between her aunt and the glowing cruiser in the mirror. Two doors opened in unison. The sound of boots striking pavement carried the kind of confidence that came from long practice. On the driver's side, Officer Brett Harley approached, tall, broad-shouldered, his face set in a scowl that seemed carved into his features. His flashlight tapped the window with a rhythm meant to assert dominance, not to illuminate. The gleam of his badge caught in the light, but it was his hand, resting casually on the grip of his holstered weapon, that drew Sarah's full attention. On the passenger's side, a younger man moved slower, less sure of himself. Officer Kevin Rohr, barely out of training, his eyes scanning but not locking onto anything. He stood a step back, as though waiting for direction. Sarah noted the difference instantly. One predator, one follower. She lowered her window halfway, keeping her face calm, neutral, her voice low and steady. "Good evening, officer." Harley didn't return the courtesy. "License and registration," he barked, leaning closer, his flashlight beam glaring across her face. His tone was sharp, designed to provoke. Sarah kept her eyes forward. "May I ask why I was stopped?" "I said license and registration." His jaw tightened, his lip curling almost imperceptibly. He didn't answer her question because he didn't intend to. "My license is in my back pocket," Sarah said carefully, her voice just above a whisper. "My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, slowly." Harley's eyes narrowed, his hand shifting slightly on his holster. "You people always got something to say, don't you? Just do what you're told." Maya stiffened beside her, fingers sliding her phone into her lap, angling the screen downward as her thumb brushed the record button. The faint chime was muffled by the hum of the truck's engine, but Sarah caught it, her gaze never wavering from the officer in her window. "The love compartment first," she said aloud, narrating her movements. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, opening the compartment and retrieving the registration. She held it up, steady, waiting for him to take it. Harley didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he leaned further into the window, his face inches from hers, his breath sour with coffee and cigarettes. "Step out of the vehicle," he said suddenly, his voice low but full of threat. Sarah's heartbeat drummed in her ears. "Officer, I have not been told why I was stopped. I've complied with your instructions." "I said get out." His voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the quiet street. He tugged at the door handle. Maya's voice quivered. "We're 2 blocks from home. Why are you doing this?" "Quiet," Harley snapped, his eyes flicking to Maya with disdain before returning to Sarah. Sarah's grip tightened, fractionally, on the steering wheel as Harley yanked the door wider. The move was sudden, aggressive, meant to jolt her into compliance. His fingers dug into her forearm, the pressure sharp against her skin. Years of discipline screamed at her not to react. "Not yet." "My niece is in the car," Sarah said firmly, her voice low but steady. "Please, don't escalate this." Harley sneered. "Don't tell me what I'm doing. You're being detained for suspicious behavior, possible drug trafficking. Out of the car, now." "Drug trafficking?" Maya's voice cracked, disbelief cutting through her fear. "We just left school. She was in the garden all afternoon." "Maya," Sarah said softly, her eyes locked on Harley's. "Quiet." But Harley had heard enough. That's it. Playing lawyer, are you? Let's see how smart you sound on the ground. He pulled harder, his other hand sliding toward the holster at his side. On the passenger's side, Officer Rohr shifted uneasily. His hand hovered near his weapon but didn't draw. His voice was hesitant. "Sir, maybe we should call—" "Shut it, rookie!" Harley cut him off, his voice like a whip. "Get the girl's phone. Now!" Rohr hesitated, his eyes flicking to Maya, who now held her phone openly, her hand trembling, but her face set in defiance. "Don't you touch her," Sarah warned, her voice dropping an octave. Even Harley seemed to register the weight in her tone. "Put the phone down," Harley barked at Maya. "That's evidence tampering." "No," Maya shot back, her voice shaking but louder now. "This is assault. We have rights." The words seemed to detonate something inside Harley. His face twisted with rage. He let go of Sarah's arm only long enough to draw his weapon. The black metal gleamed under the cruiser's lights as he leveled it at her chest. "She's reaching!" Harley shouted suddenly, though Sarah hadn't moved an inch. "Gun!" The sound of the shot shattered the evening. Time fractured. Sarah's training seized control before her conscious mind could process. She twisted sideways, the bullet whistling past her shoulder. Her left hand shot up, seizing Harley's wrist. With a swift motion born from years of combat drills, she forced his arm upward, her right hand striking his elbow. The pistol clattered onto the pavement with a metallic echo. Maya gasped, her scream caught in her throat as she watched her aunt move with inhuman precision. Sarah surged from the truck, flowing like water, using Harley's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, she pivoted and flipped him onto the ground. The impact rattled the earth, knocking the wind from his lungs. He sprawled in the dirt, eyes wide in shock. Rohr's weapon was still holstered, his body frozen. Sarah's hand darted down, snatching Harley's pistol from the ground, her stance wide, her breath steady. "Maya, down!" she commanded. Her niece ducked instinctively as a second officer rounded the hood of the cruiser, weapon drawn. Sarah moved faster than the officer's eyes could follow. 2 shots rang out, precise, controlled, each striking the officer in the thigh. He collapsed instantly, his gun clattering from his grip. He howled in pain, clutching his legs. The street erupted in echoes. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped onto porches, drawn by the gunfire. A dog barked furiously from behind a chain-link fence. Children's laughter, moments earlier, had vanished into silence. On the pavement, Harley groaned, clutching his ribs, his face twisted in humiliation. He dragged himself upright, spitting dirt from his mouth. His voice, hoarse with rage, bellowed into his radio. "Officer down, suspect armed and dangerous. Black female, mid-50s, military training. Shoot on sight, I repeat, shoot on sight." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. He was already rewriting the story, painting her as the aggressor. The machine was moving into place and she knew how fast it could spin out of control. Rohr stood a few feet away, frozen in place, his hand still hovering near his holster. His wide eyes flicked from the fallen officers to Sarah's steady stance, then to Maya trembling behind her. He didn't. "Don't," Sarah said sharply, her voice a blade. "You draw and this ends badly for all of us." Rohr's hand fell to his side. He didn't speak, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. "Maya, to me!" Sarah ordered. The teenager scrambled from the truck, staying low, pressing herself against her aunt's back. Her phone still clutched tightly, the red recording light blinking. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." Sarah backed them slowly away from the truck, her eyes scanning rooftops, windows, shadows. The world had shifted. She was no longer a gardener or an aunt driving her niece home. She was the Reaper again, instincts awake, calculating threats in every direction. From the porch of the Thompson house, curtains twitched. An old man stared wide-eyed before ducking out of sight. Down the street, someone shouted for their children to get inside. Doors slammed. The neighborhood pulled back, retreating into shadows, leaving Sarah and Maya exposed on the asphalt. Harley staggered to his knees, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where his skull had struck pavement. His face twisted into something feral. "You're dead!" he screamed. "You hear me? You're dead, you terrorist!" The sirens were already wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. Backup was coming, and Sarah knew what orders they would follow. Harley's voice had poisoned the airwaves, branded her an enemy. She had seconds, maybe minutes, before the entire block was swarmed. Her heart pounded, but her breathing stayed even. She had been in worse situations. She had walked through fire before. The only difference was that this time, she wasn't alone. She pulled Maya close, whispering just loud enough for her to hear, "Stay with me. No matter what happens, you don't leave my side." Maya nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, but her jaw set. The sirens screamed closer. The hunt had already begun. The night swallowed them as Sarah pulled Maya into the back alleys. The sound of sirens rolled closer, bouncing off the brick walls, multiplying until it felt like the entire city was closing in. Sarah's steps were silent, deliberate, every corner checked, every shadow read. Her hand rested lightly on Maya's shoulder, guiding her with firm precision, but never slowing. Maya clutched her phone, still recording, still trembling. Her breath came in short bursts as she tried to keep pace. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe," Sarah said, scanning the rooftops. Her voice was calm, but there was a steel edge in it, the same voice that had ordered men into battlefields. They cut across a narrow lane, slipped behind a grocery store, and ducked into a side door that creaked faintly on its hinges. Inside, the cool stone steps led downward into darkness. Sarah guided Maya by memory, the kind of memory that wasn't ordinary. It was trained, precise, a soldier's recall of hidden exits and safe havens. The faint smell of candle wax met them as they entered the basement. Stacks of hymnals and folded chairs lined the walls. A single bulb hung overhead, its pull chain swaying. The place was small, but it was shelter. Reverend Samuel Wicks appeared from the shadows, a lantern in his hand, his lined face etched with worry. His robe hung loose around his shoulders, his eyes sharp despite the hour. He froze when he saw Sarah, then nodded slowly, as if something long buried had surfaced. "I heard the shots," Wicks said softly. "I prayed it wasn't you." Sarah lowered her eyes. "We don't have long. They'll sweep the neighborhood." Maya turned sharply. "You knew?" she asked the Reverend, her voice trembling. "You know her?" Wicks's gaze softened as it moved to Maya. "Child, your aunt has carried burdens you can't yet imagine, but now, it seems, those burdens have come knocking." "I'm not worried," she said. "I think they'll—" The basement seemed to close in around them, the sound of sirens distant but constant. Maya turned to her aunt, her face pale, her voice breaking. "What are you? I saw you, how you moved, how you fought. That wasn't normal. That wasn't just—" Aunt Sarah. Sarah exhaled slowly, her shoulders heavy. She sat on a wooden chair, the weight of her silence filling the room. Her hands, still steadied from the fight, now trembled faintly in the low light. "I wanted to tell you," she said at last, her voice quiet. "But I swore I never would. I wanted you to know me only as your aunt, the woman in the garden, not the woman I used to be." Maya's breath caught. "Then who are you?" Sarah's eyes met hers, unflinching. "Delta Force, call sign Reaper." The word lingered in the air, cold and heavy. Maya blinked, her mouth dry. She had seen movies, read headlines about elite soldiers, but the woman sitting in front of her, the one who packed her lunches and teased her about homework, was suddenly a stranger. "Reaper," Maya whispered. The name felt dangerous on her tongue. Like death." Sarah's gaze didn't falter. "It wasn't a name I chose, it was given to me. Missions no one else would take, battles no one else could fight. I carried it because I had to, because someone had to. Maya shook her head, pacing the small basement. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the concrete. All this time you were just pretending? Planting tomatoes, fixing sinks, driving me to school? You made me think you were just normal. You lied. Sarah's voice cracked with a softness Maya had never heard. I wanted normal. Every seed in that garden, every nail in that house, it was my way of burying what I was. But tonight, it didn't stay buried. Maya turned, her eyes sharp. You didn't hesitate, Aunt Sarah. You didn't even think. The moment he drew that gun, you changed, like a switch flipped. Sarah's jaw tightened, because hesitation gets people killed, and I wasn't going to let it be you. Maya's eyes welled, torn between awe and fear. You're like some kind of superhero, or a monster. I don't know which. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the single bulb. Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped. I'm neither. I'm just a woman who's done things I can't take back, who's carried blood on her hands. I never wanted you to see that part of me. Reverend Wicks stepped closer, his lantern casting shadows across the room. You've hidden long enough, Sarah. God may have spared you for a reason. Perhaps he preserved your skills for such a time as this. Sarah shook her head sharply. Don't sanctify it. I've seen too much to believe it was divine. Maya crossed her arms, her voice trembling but fierce. So what now? We hide here while the cops paint you as some terrorist? They're already calling you armed and dangerous. You think silence will save us? Sarah's breath caught, but she didn't answer. Maya pressed on, her voice rising. You always taught me to stand up in class, to speak truth even when it's hard. But now you're telling me to stay quiet, to hide while they lie about you? That's not right. Sarah looked away, her eyes glassy. I fought wars so you wouldn't have to fight this one. But I'm in it now, Maya said, her voice breaking. Because of you. The words cut deeper than any blade. Sarah leaned back, staring at the low ceiling, her chest tight. She had carried bullets, knives, and scars without flinching. But hearing her niece's voice tremble with betrayal struck her in a place no enemy ever had. Reverend Wicks lowered himself onto a stool, his hands clasped around the lantern. His voice was low, measured. You can't choose the battles that come to your door, Sarah. You can only choose how you'll meet them. You hid your skills because you thought they were curses. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're tools waiting for the right moment. Sarah's fists clenched. I'm tired of battles. I buried that part of me for a reason. Every time I pulled a trigger, someone's son didn't come home. Every time I finished a mission, another scar followed me back. You think I want that life again? You think I want Maya to see me as nothing but a weapon? Maya stepped closer, her eyes wet but unwavering. I saw you save us tonight. If you hadn't been that weapon, I wouldn't be here. You can't hate that part of yourself when it just saved my life. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to insist she could find another way, but the truth was carved into the silence. Without her reflexes, without the Reaper, they'd both be lying on the street. You don't understand what it costs, Sarah whispered. Then explain it, Maya demanded. Explain to me why you'd rather hide than fight, because from where I'm standing, hiding already got us hunted. Sarah's eyes closed, the memories flashing. Dust storms in Kandahar, night raids in Mosul, the silence of comrades who never returned. She opened them again, meeting Maya's gaze. Because every time I fight, a piece of me disappears, and I'm afraid if I fight again, there'll be nothing left. The room fell silent. Even the sirens outside had faded, leaving only the hum of the light and the faint creak of the building settling. Reverend Wicks finally spoke, his voice soft but resolute. Perhaps, Sarah, the question isn't whether you fight or not. The question is whether you fight for yourself or for something greater. You've carried the weight of killing. Maybe now you're called to carry the weight of protecting. That's not the same thing. Maya's hand reached out, trembling but steady. She touched her aunt's scarred knuckles, the hands that had planted gardens and dismantled killers. You don't have to do it alone this time, but you can't run from it either. Not anymore. Sarah looked at her niece's hand over hers, then at Wix's steady eyes. For the first time since the shots rang out, she felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't dared in years. Not hope, resolve. The Reaper wasn't gone, she had only been sleeping. The precinct hummed with fluorescent light and the stale stench of burnt coffee. Officer Harley sat in front of a glowing monitor, his broad shoulders hunched, his jaw locked. His body cam footage looped on the screen, each frame replaying the moment he had yanked Sarah's car door, the flash of his weapon, the chaos that followed. But this wasn't the raw truth. With every keystroke, Harley scrubbed his guilt away. "Cut this," he muttered, slicing out the scene where his hand hovered menacingly over his holster before Sarah even spoke. "Delete." Then the part where he sneered, mocking her calm tone. "Delete." What remained was a polished lie. A woman resisting, a sudden lunge toward him, and his desperate cry of "gun" to justify the shot he never should have fired. Roar, the rookie, stood silently at the back of the room, his hands shoved into his pockets. He had been there that night, seen the escalation, felt the wrongness in his gut. Now, as Harley leaned forward, piecing together a narrative out of fragments, Roar's stomach churned. "Looks clean," Harley said, leaning back with a satisfied grunt. "This will bury her. Terrorist in the making. Anti-police agitator. No jury will question it." Oh. Across the room, a local reporter was already setting up for a late-night press conference. Words like domestic threat and public safety floated across the screens. Roar swallowed hard, glancing at the unedited footage still lingering in the cache. He saw Sarah's steady hands, her measured movements, her desperate attempt to de-escalate before Harley exploded. That truth was being erased before his eyes. The captain entered, clapping Harley on the shoulder. "Good work. We'll have this on every network by morning. Nobody will see her as anything but a danger. We're mobilizing a task force to shut her down before she can run." Roar forced a nod, but his chest felt heavy. His training screamed obedience, but his conscience whispered betrayal. He stepped closer to the terminal, eyes catching on a small drive plugged into the machine. With his back turned to Harley, he slipped his phone out, snapping silent photos of the timeline, the edits, the missing minutes. Evidence, fragile as glass, but proof nonetheless. As the first news broadcast rolled, Sarah's face flashed across the screen. The chyron read, "Armed black woman terrorizes officer. Declared terrorist threat." Roar clenched his jaw. He knew the truth. And now, he wasn't sure how long he could keep it buried. By dawn, the city was no longer a city. It was a hunting ground. Helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights tearing holes in the dark. Armored vehicles rolled down residential streets as though they were foreign soil. The loudspeakers blared commands for civilians to stay inside, to report sightings of the so-called terrorist. Sarah and Maya crouched low in the back of an abandoned shed behind the Reverend's church. Sarah's ears tracked the rhythm of the helicopters, her body tense, her instincts alive. Every creak of wood, every distant dog bark sent her senses flaring. She had been hunted before, halfway across the world, but never in her own country, never in the streets where she once bought groceries and waved at neighbors. Maya peeked through a crack in the boards. "They're everywhere," she whispered, her voice thin with fear. "This is insane. They're treating you like some kind of war criminal." Sarah's lips pressed tight. "That's exactly what they want. Make the public believe I'm a threat, and they can do anything to me. Anything to us." Outside, the mechanical growl of engines drew closer. Sarah's eyes darted to the shadows stretching across the shed. She motioned for silence, pulling Maya close. The beam of a spotlight swept over the lawn, stopping just short of their hiding place. In the distance, an explosion of splintered wood and shouts cracked the morning air. SWAT had breached her home. The roar of boots and battering rams filled the block. Maya gasped, clutching Sarah's arm. "They're tearing it apart," Sarah whispered, her jaw tight. Inside the house, everything was smashed. Drawers overturned, photographs ripped from frames, dishes shattered. Men in black uniforms stormed through rooms, their rifles raised as though expecting enemies behind every curtain. In truth, they weren't searching for weapons or documents. They were erasing her. Back in the shed, Maya trembled. Why would they destroy everything? What are they looking for? Sarah's eyes hardened. They're not looking. They're covering. Wipe away any sign of who I really am. Burn every file, erase every trace. When the public looks at me, all they'll see is the story Harley built. The sound of another crash echoed from the house. Sarah's throat tightened as she imagined the photos of her sister, Maya's mother, burned or shredded. The garden boots by the back door trampled under heavy boots. A life she had fought to build, reduced to rubble by men who called themselves protectors. Maya buried her face against Sarah's shoulder, her words muffled by tears. They're trying to erase you, like you never existed. Sarah wrapped her arm around her niece, her voice low but fierce. They can destroy my home, but they will not destroy me. As dawn bled into morning, the city buzzed with a fevered narrative. News anchors repeated the same lines: armed suspect, domestic threat, anti-police extremist. Footage of broken glass and bullet casings outside Sarah's house looped endlessly, framed as proof of her violence rather than the assault against her. The machine was in motion, grinding truth into dust. Inside the precinct, Hartley basked in the glow of it all. He stood before cameras, bandaged arm in a sling, his voice steady with false righteousness. Last night, I was nearly killed by a trained militant masquerading as an ordinary woman. She drew a weapon, threatened my life, and endangered this community. We will not rest until she is in custody. Applause rose from certain corners, but Roar's stomach clenched tighter with every lie. He watched Harley's performance, the smug grin hidden beneath his rehearsed solemnity, and he knew the story had already taken root in the minds of millions. But the rookie also knew the edits, the missing minutes, the truth tucked away on that body cam drive. When the conference ended, Roar slipped away, his hand brushing the inside of his jacket where a small flash drive now rested. He had copied the uncut footage, all of it. Harley's sneers, his aggression, the false cry of "gun." Proof that Sarah had been hunted, not the hunter. Meanwhile, Sarah and Maya moved silently through back streets, guided by instinct more than direction. Every intersection was a gamble, every corner a test. Helicopters circled like vultures overhead, their searchlights sweeping the streets with mechanical precision. Maya stumbled once, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Sarah caught her, steadying her with the strength of someone who had carried comrades across deserts. "We can't outrun them forever," Maya whispered, breathless. "We don't outrun them," Sarah said, her eyes sharp. "We outthink them." They ducked into a storm drain, the air damp and heavy. Sarah scanned the map in her mind, the old soldier resurfacing in her. "They expect us to run west, toward the fields. That's where they'll concentrate. So we go east, toward the rail yard. It's loud, chaotic, and easier to disappear." Maya nodded, trusting her aunt's voice even as fear gnawed at her. Above them, armored trucks rolled down the street, smashing through fences, their engines growling like beasts. To the public, it was a show of force. To Sarah, it was overcompensation, the desperate theatrics of men trying to bury a lie. She tightened her grip on Maya's hand. The world saw her as a terrorist now, but she knew better. And she swore to herself, as the helicopters thundered overhead, that she would not just survive, She would expose them. Because the Reaper was awake again, and this time, the war was on her soil. The storm drains emptied them near the edge of the old industrial district, where rusting warehouses leaned against one another like forgotten sentinels. Sarah led Maya through the maze of cracked concrete and steel doors until she reached a nondescript building marked only by a faded number spray-painted decades ago. She knocked 3 times, paused, then tapped twice more in a rhythm that seemed more like code than coincidence. A bolt scraped from the inside and the door cracked open. A man with close-cropped hair and glasses peered out. His frame was lean but solid, his eyes sharp even behind the lenses. For a moment he didn't speak, then his face broke into a half-smile. "Reaper," he said, voice low and steady. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Sarah's shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Malcolm!" The door opened wider, revealing a dim interior lit by the glow of monitors. Rows of screens covered the walls, displaying maps, live traffic feeds, police scanners, and scrolling code. The hum of servers filled the air like a second heartbeat. Maya followed Sarah inside, her wide eyes drinking in the surreal scene. The place looked less like a safe house and more like a command center for some underground war. Wires snaked across the floor, hard drives stacked like bricks, and a battered coffee pot hissed in the corner. Malcolm shut the door behind them, sliding the bolt back into place. "I figured you were out, living that quiet life you always talked about. Guess trouble found you anyway." Sarah's jaw tightened. "It didn't just find me, it was waiting." Malcolm's gaze flicked to Maya, then back to Sarah. "And the kid." "My niece," Sarah said. "She stays." Malcolm nodded, his eyes softening. "Then she stays. Come on, I'll show you what I've been working on." They followed him to a table piled high with papers and digital tablets. Malcolm tapped a few keys and the screens around them shifted. Maps appeared, dotted with pins. Red lines traced patterns across the city, converging on neighborhoods that looked unremarkable at first glance. "I started digging months ago," Malcolm said. "Didn't trust half the raids I was hearing about on the scanners. Too many anonymous tips, too many families dragged out of homes in the dead of night. The official line is drugs, gang activity, domestic threats, but the charges vanish before trial. The families? They don't come back." Maya leaned closer, her brow furrowed. "So where do they go?" Malcolm's jaw tightened. "That's the question, isn't it? But here's what I know. Harley's unit is always involved. Every raid, every disappearance, his name comes up. And not just him. There's a web here. Developers, banks, even city officials. Someone's cleaning house, making room for something big." Sarah stared at the screen, her chest heavy. This wasn't about her. It wasn't just Harley's ego or a single bad night. She had stumbled into something larger, darker, and far more dangerous than she imagined. Malcolm pulled up another screen, this one filled with spreadsheets and photographs. He pointed to rows of addresses, each tied to an incident report. The photos showed families standing in front of modest homes, smiling for what looked like community newsletters or school directories. "Every one of these families," Malcolm said, his finger trailing down the list, "was pushed out after a raid. Some moved, but a lot just vanished. Their properties were transferred within weeks to shell companies connected to the same real estate developer, a guy named Leonard Crane. He's been buying up half the east side." Maya shook her head slowly, piecing it together. "So Harley and his unit, they're not just harassing people, they're working for developers, scaring families out, then taking the houses." Malcolm gave her a grim smile. "Smart kid, that's exactly it. But it's more than harassment. It's force, threats, sometimes worse. Families don't just leave overnight without a reason. There are cases where no forwarding address exists, like they never existed at all." Sarah's throat tightened. Her life in the shadows, her decision to bury her past and live quiet, had blinded her to the war happening in her own backyard. She had fought enemies in deserts and jungles, but the same tactics of displacement and control were now being used here, on her people, in her city. Malcolm turned to her. "When I saw the news this morning, I knew it was connected. They're not just trying to silence you, they're using you as a scapegoat to justify doubling down, make you the terrorist, then crack down harder on the neighborhoods they want cleared. It's a playbook, old as time." Maya pressed her palms against the table, her eyes blazing. "So what do? We can't just hide. We can't let them keep destroying families." Sarah looked at her niece, seeing not just fear but fire. She had her mother's spirit, that unyielding conviction. Sarah sighed. "First, we gather proof. Enough to expose the whole machine. Malcolm, how much do you have?" "Plenty," Malcolm said, tapping the stack of drives. "But it's scattered, raw data. They'll bury it if we don't present it clean, undeniable. That's where you two come in." He slid a laptop toward Maya. "Think you can help me organize this mess?" Maya blinked, surprised. "Me? I'm not a hacker." "You don't need to be," Malcolm said. "You're sharp, good with patterns. I've got files, timestamps, incident reports. We need them cross-referenced, mapped out, turned into something a jury, or the public, can't ignore." Maya glanced at Sarah, who nodded. "Do it. We need every advantage." As Maya settled into the chair, Sarah turned to Malcolm. "And what about Reverend Wicks? He knows the families. He's seen the aftermath. We need his voice." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Bring him in. The more witnesses, the harder it'll be for them to bury the story. But be careful. If they sniff this out, we'll all be targets." Sarah's lips curved into a bitter smile. "We already are." That evening, Reverend Wicks arrived at the safe house, slipping through the door with the cautious steps of a man who understood the weight of secrets. His eyes widened at the sight of the screens, the maps, the names pinned to evidence boards. He turned to Sarah with a grave nod. "I knew you'd find your way here," he said softly. "God doesn't lead people to crossroads by mistake." Sarah clasped his hand. "We're digging, Reverend. Malcolm's uncovered a network. Harley's raids, families disappearing, developers snatching up homes. It's bigger than we thought." Wicks sighed, settling into a chair. "I've been burying too many families, not in the ground but in silence. Parents who come to me weeping because their children vanished overnight. Mothers packing bags in fear after raids, leaving with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and the rest, they just disappear. Folks ask me where they went, but I have no answer." Maya turned from the laptop, her voice steady. "We're seeing the pattern now. Addresses, timelines, ownership transfers. It's systemic. They're clearing people out to make way for development projects." The Reverend's eyes darkened. "Then it's not just sin, it's strategy. Displacement dressed as progress, and the ones who profit sit in pews on Sunday, smiling as though their hands are clean." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "They're not clean. And they won't stay clean. We have the data. We have witnesses. We'll tear the mask off." Wicks placed a hand on hers, his touch warm but firm. "Be cautious, Sarah. This fight is righteous. But righteous fights draw heavy fire. They've already branded you an enemy. When you expose them, they'll come harder." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I've faced harder, and this time I'm not running. Not from them, not from what I am." Malcolm swiveled in his chair, pulling up a feed from a drone camera he had tapped into. "They're not wasting time. Harley's unit is expanding raids tonight. 5 addresses already flagged. Families will be dragged out before morning if we don't act." Maya's hands clenched. "We can't just watch." Sarah's mind raced. She could hear the echoes of past missions in foreign lands, where timing meant lives saved or lost. "We won't. But we need more than force. We need the truth. Broadcast where they can't twist it." "Malcolm, can you hack the news feed?" Malcolm smirked. "Already working on it. Give me a few days and I can get our story in front of every screen in the state. But we'll need airtight evidence. Once it's out, there's no going back." Reverend Wicks rose, his voice calm but resolute. "Then let's prepare. God may not shield us from battle, but He gives us the strength to fight it." Sarah glanced at Maya, who was staring at the screen, her determination carved deep into her young face. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a war for truth, for community, for every family already erased. And this time, the Reaper wasn't fighting alone. The safe house was quiet, the screens humming faintly in the background, when Maya slipped outside for air. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. She wrapped her arms around herself, her mind heavy with the revelations they had uncovered. Families vanishing, homes stolen, Harley's unit working as mercenaries for developers. It was too much to hold at once. She nearly jumped when a figure stepped out of the shadows. A young officer, his uniform jacket missing, stood a few feet away. His hands were raised slightly, not in threat, but in surrender. Maya recognized him immediately. Officer Rohr, the rookie who had looked uneasy during Harley's outbursts. "Maya," he said softly, his voice trembling. I had to find you." Her first instinct was to back away, but something in his eyes held her still. Not arrogance, not the coldness of Harley's men, but guilt. Heavy, suffocating guilt. "You shouldn't be here," she said cautiously. "If Harley finds out—" "I know," Rohr cut in quickly, "but I can't do it anymore. I can't stand by while they destroy lives. I joined the force to protect people, not tear them apart." He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, pulling out a small digital recorder. He pressed it into Maya's hand. "Listen to this." Maya hesitated, then pressed play. Harley's voice filled the air, unmistakable, dripping with arrogance. "They think we're just cleaning up the streets," Harley said on the recording. "But this is bigger than that. Every raid clears ground for Crane and his boys. We get bonuses, promotions, and they get their shiny developments. Everyone wins. Except the families dumb enough to stay. And when it's done, nobody remembers them." Rohr's face twisted with disgust as the recording ended. "I've got more. Hours of him bragging, laughing about it like it's some kind of game. He thinks we'll all follow him no matter what. But I can't, not anymore." Maya stared at the recorder in her hand, her pulse racing. This was more than data, more than spreadsheets and maps. This was Harley's own voice, confessing his crimes. "You're risking your life bringing this here?" she whispered. "I know," Rohr said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "But maybe it's worth it if it helps you stop him." At that moment, Sarah stepped out of the shadows. She had been listening the entire time, silent and watchful, her gaze fixed on Rohr, hard as steel. "You expect me to believe you've turned on him?" she asked. Rohr swallowed. "I don't expect you to believe me. I expect you to test me." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something else. Recognition of courage, however fragile. "Then let's test you," she said coldly. "If you're lying, you won't live to regret it. If you're telling the truth, then you may just have a part to play." Inside, Rohr sat at the table, while Sarah, Malcolm, Maya, and Reverend Wicks listened to the recordings. Each clip was worse than the last. Harley boasting about bonuses from Crane, mocking displaced families, sneering about how the council would look the other way. The words painted a picture darker than any speculation. They were proof of corruption, undeniable and damning. When the final recording ended, silence filled the room. The screens flickered softly, casting pale light across the faces around the table. Sarah leaned forward, her arms crossed. "If this is legit, it changes everything. But Harley will know someone turned on him. He'll come for you." Rohr nodded. I already burned that bridge when I walked out. I don't care what happens to me. I just don't want to be part of his sickness anymore." Malcolm studied him for a long moment, then spoke. "We'll need more than recordings. The council won't act unless we make it impossible for them not to. We need a strategy, loud, public, undeniable." Reverend Wicks clasped his hands together. "Then let us take the truth where lies are thickest, the city council chamber, a place where they preach accountability yet bury injustice in polished speeches. If we speak there, with evidence in hand, the world will hear." Sarah nodded slowly. "We hit them on their stage, not in shadows, not in whispers, in front of cameras, in front of the city. But Harley will try to shut us down before we get that far. We'll need backups, redundancies. Malcolm, can you set up a live broadcast?" Malcolm smirked faintly. "Not just one. I can link into half a dozen independent networks, live streams, even encrypted feeds. If one goes down, another takes over. They'll have to cut power to the whole city to stop it." Maya leaned forward eagerly. "I can help. I know how to build layered backups, mirrors, secondary drives, portable uploads. If they destroy one system, another one will still carry the message." Sarah looked at her niece, pride swelling in her chest despite the fear. "This isn't your fight, Maya. You're just a kid." Maya met her gaze without flinching. "No, this is exactly my fight. If they're targeting families, if they're erasing people like me, then I'm already in it. I'm not going to hide while you risk everything." Her words cut through the room, strong and unshaken. Reverend Wicks smiled softly, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Sometimes, the youngest among us remind us of the fire we once carried. Let her flame burn, Sarah. It may light the way." Sarah exhaled slowly, her shoulders heavy with the weight of both love and fear. "All right," she said finally. "We plan for the council meeting. We hit them where they think they're untouchable. And we don't just aim at Harley. We aim at the system that made him possible." Roar lifted his head, his voice low but resolute. "Then let me help. I know his routines, his weaknesses, how he thinks. Use me however you need." Sarah's eyes softened slightly. "We will. But understand, this fight doesn't end at the council chambers. That's just the beginning." Over the next days, the safe house became a hive of preparation. Malcolm rigged antennas on the roof, testing signals, creating encrypted pathways that branched like a spider's web across the city's digital infrastructure. Maya sat at his side, fingers flying over keyboards as she built redundancies, her youthful determination blending seamlessly with Malcolm's seasoned expertise. Sarah trained them like soldiers, not in combat but in discipline. Every file was cataloged, every testimony rehearsed, every system checked twice over. She moved through the room with the focus of a commander, though her eyes lingered often on Maya, watching her grow into a role Sarah had never intended for her. At night, when the work slowed and exhaustion set in, Sarah would sit alone, her mind tugged between fear and pride. She had spent years burying her past, trying to shield Maya from the darkness she carried. Now that same darkness had forced Maya to rise, to fight not with weapons, but with courage and conviction. One evening, Sarah found Maya sitting at the table, surrounded by drives and handwritten notes. The glow of the monitors lit her face, determined but weary. "You should be asleep," Sarah said softly. Maya didn't look up. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the families we've mapped out. Names, faces, kids my age. They're gone, Aunt Sarah, just gone. If I stop working, I feel like I'm letting them down." Sarah sat across from her, reaching out to touch her hand. "You're not letting them down. You're giving them a voice they never had. But you don't have to carry it all alone." Maya finally met her eyes, her voice breaking slightly. "Neither do you." The words struck deep. For so long, Sarah had been the protector, the shield, the lone fighter. Now she saw her niece not as a child to be sheltered, but as a partner in the fight. someone carrying her own weight with a courage that belied her years. The next morning, Reverend Wicks arrived with a small group of community members, parents of missing children, families who had been displaced, neighbors who had witnessed raids. They shared their testimonies quietly, some with tears, others with fury. Malcolm and Maya recorded every word, adding them to the growing archive of undeniable truth. When one mother described the night her house was raided, her children pulled from bed, her husband dragged into the street, Maya's hands trembled, but she did not stop typing. Sarah watched her, heart breaking and swelling at once. The girl was becoming more than she had ever imagined. By the week's end, the plan was set. They would take their evidence to the council chambers, broadcast live to every home and screen in the city. Harley would be forced to watch as his lies crumbled in front of the very people he claimed to protect. As the team gathered for one last briefing, Sarah looked around the room, at Malcolm hunched over his systems, at Reverend Wicks steady and unyielding, at Roar restless but resolute, and at Maya, eyes blazing with the fire of a new generation. For the first time, Sarah felt not just the burden of the fight, but the strength of allies at her side. The Reaper was no longer alone. And when the council doors opened, they would not walk in as fugitives or victims. They would walk in as truth-bearers, ready to drag corruption into the light. The morning of the rally broke with a nervous energy that seemed to ripple through the entire city. Outside City Hall, hundreds gathered, families holding signs, clergy standing shoulder to shoulder with activists, mothers clutching photographs of loved ones who had vanished. The chants grew louder as the crowd swelled, echoing off the marble columns of the government building. Sarah stood near the edge of the crowd, her eyes scanning constantly, every instinct on high alert. Reverend Wicks had called this rally not just as a show of strength, but as a message. The community was done being silent. Cameras were already rolling, reporters capturing the sight of ordinary people demanding answers. Maya moved beside Sarah, clutching her tablet close to her chest. She had been up all night perfecting the live stream backup systems, and her determination shone through the fatigue in her eyes. "It's working," she whispered, tapping at the screen. "Every speech is being streamed. Even if they cut the feeds, we'll still be live." Sarah gave her niece a brief nod, pride mingled with fear. "Stay close. These kinds of days can turn fast." At first, the rally had the energy of a peaceful march. Chants, speeches, banners waving in the summer air. But then Sarah noticed something off. A group of men moved through the crowd not with the rhythm of protesters, but with calculated precision. Their eyes scanned, their movements too disciplined, too rehearsed. They wore plain clothes, but Sarah recognized the stiffness in their posture, trained law enforcement hiding in plain sight. Her stomach tightened. Harley's men. Before she could signal Malcolm, smoke erupted from one side of the square. A canister clattered across the pavement, releasing a thick cloud that sent people coughing and stumbling. Panic spread like wildfire. More smoke bombs followed, and within seconds, the peaceful chants dissolved into screams. Sarah grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her close as the crowd surged in all directions. People tripped over one another, blinded by smoke, their signs abandoned on the ground. Somewhere in the chaos, a loudspeaker crackled, but the words were drowned out by the roar of fear. Then, through the haze, Sarah saw them. Two men lunging toward Maya. They grabbed her arms with brutal force, wrenching her away. Maya screamed, her tablet crashing to the pavement. "No!" Sarah shouted, charging forward, shoving through panicked bodies. Roar appeared from the other side, throwing himself at the men with a desperate fury. He tackled one to the ground, fists flying, but the other yanked Maya backward, dragging her toward a waiting van. Another officer appeared from the smoke and smashed Roar across the jaw with a baton. He crumpled to the ground, blood streaking his face, still trying to crawl after them. Sarah fought through the chaos, lungs burning from the smoke, but by the time she broke free, the van's doors had slammed shut. Tires screeched, rubber burned, and the vehicle disappeared into the labyrinth of streets. Maya was gone. The crowd staggered in the aftermath, coughing, crying, calling out names. Malcolm pulled Sarah back to her feet, his own face streaked with ash and sweat. His eyes widened when he realized Maya wasn't with her. "Where is she?" His voice cracked with panic. "They took her," Sarah choked out, her chest heaving. "Harley's men, they dragged her into a van." Roar stumbled toward them, one side of his face swelling, his lips split. "I tried," he rasped, his voice broken. "I swear I tried. They were too many." His hands trembled as he pressed them to his bloodied face. Sarah's mind spun, rage and terror colliding until she could barely breathe. All their planning, all their precautions, and still Harley had found a way to strike at the heart of her resolve. He hadn't gone after Malcolm or Wicks. He had taken Maya because he knew it would break Sarah more than anything else. An hour later, back at the safe house, the room was suffocating with silence. Roar sat slumped in a chair, bandaging his wounds with trembling hands. Reverend Wicks prayed quietly in the corner, though his hands shook as he gripped the Bible. Malcolm paced like a caged animal, slamming his fist against the table until the monitors rattled. Then the laptop chimed. A message had arrived. No address, no sender, just a link. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she clicked it. The screen filled with an image so sharp it cut her soul. Maya, bound to a chair, her face bruised, a strip of tape across her mouth. Her eyes were wide with fear, glistening with tears, but there was no sound. A voice followed, dripping with malice. "Harley." "Well, well," he drawled, his shadowy figure appearing behind Maya. "The Great Reaper thought she could bring me down. Thought she could parade me in front of the council like some kind of villain in chains. But now, I've got something you want more than justice." He yanked the tape from Maya's mouth. She gasped, crying out, "Aunt Sarah!" before Harley shoved her head back against the chair. "Here's the deal," Harley continued, his tone casual, like he was negotiating over a drink. "You come to me, alone. No cameras, no witnesses. You and me, face to face. You do that, maybe the girl lives. You try to bring your little army, and I swear, Sarah, you'll be burying your niece before sundown." The screen went black. Silence filled the room, heavy and unbearable. Sarah stared at the dark monitor, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails cut into her palms. He had taken the one thing she could not lose, and now he was daring her to walk into the fire. Sarah's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths as the weight of Harley's ultimatum settled over the room. Every instinct in her body screamed to move, to act, to tear down whatever wall stood between her and Maya. But she forced herself to remain still, at least for the moment. One wrong move could mean her niece's life. Malcolm broke the silence first, his voice sharp with fury. "It's a trap. You know it's a trap. He'll kill you both the second you step into whatever hole he's hiding in." "I don't care," Sarah snapped, her voice shaking. "She's all I have, Malcolm. If I don't go, she's dead." Reverend Wick stood, his face lined with sorrow but also resolve. "If you go alone, you walk into his jaws. But if you do not go, you betray the very love that has fueled this fight. This is the devil's choice, Sarah, and only you can decide which road to take." Roar lifted his bruised face, his voice rough. "Let me help. I know how he thinks, how he moves. I can guide you, get you close without tipping him off." Sarah turned on him, her eyes blazing. "You had one job today. Protect her. And you failed." The words cut deep, and Roar flinched as though she had struck him. But he didn't back down. "I know," he whispered hoarsely, "and I'll carry that until I die. But let me make it right, please." Sarah's fury cracked just slightly, enough for the grief underneath to show. She turned away, pressing her hands against her face, trying to hold herself together. Malcolm placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice softer now. "We'll find a way. He wants you desperate, wants you reckless. Don't give him that power. We'll plan, we'll watch, and when we strike, it'll be on our terms." But Sarah shook her head. "There's no time for plans. Every second we waste, he has her." Her voice broke, and for the first time in years, the Reaper looked less like a warrior and more like a woman who had already lost too much. The room fell silent again, every person weighed down by the impossible decision before them. The screens flickered quietly, displaying maps, data, unfinished testimonies, reminders of the bigger fight still looming, but at that moment, the only thing that mattered was Maya's face, bruised and terrified, calling out for her aunt. Sarah closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She knew what Harley wanted. He wanted her to come crawling, alone, vulnerable, and she would, because there was no other choice. Yet beneath the crushing grief, a spark of steel remained. If Harley thought this would break her, he had forgotten who she was. She would come, but not as his victim. She would come as the storm. The house was silent, heavy with tension, as Sarah walked down the narrow hallway to the back room. Every step felt like a descent into something she had promised herself she would never touch again. Dust floated in thin shafts of light that cut through the blinds, and the old wooden floor creaked under her boots. At the end of the hall, a single door stood closed, its paint chipped, its knob worn smooth. She had not opened it in years. Inside, the air was colder, as if the room itself had been waiting for her. Against the far wall sat a trunk, military green, dented on one side, the kind issued to soldiers when the world demanded all of them. Sarah froze in the doorway, her throat tightening. That footlocker wasn't just metal and paint, it was memory, weight, and blood. She had shoved it away years ago, believing that sealing it shut meant sealing away the woman she had once been. Her hand trembled as she crouched in front of it. The lock was old, but still sturdy. The numbers etched into her mind even though she had never spoken them aloud. She spun the dial slowly, each click a reminder of long nights, impossible choices, and the shadow that once followed her everywhere. The Reaper. The lock popped open with a sharp snap. Sarah lifted the lid. The smell hit her first. Oil, leather, faint traces of gunpowder. Inside, her past lay waiting. Folded fatigues, pressed flat and rigid. A tactical vest with faded Velcro patches. Gloves worn smooth at the fingertips. Knives in their sheaths, gleaming faintly even after years of neglect. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, her sidearm. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She ran her hand over the vest, over the familiar ridges and straps, her fingers tracing the places where patches had once borne her unit insignia. She remembered the nights she had worn it into war zones, carrying lives on her back, carrying the weight of every decision to kill or spare. She had buried this part of herself because she feared what it had turned her into, but now Harley had forced her hand. A flash of Maya's face, bound to the chair, filled her mind, her niece crying out her name through fear and pain. Sarah's hesitation hardened into steel. That life she thought she buried was the only thing that could save Maya now. Her hands steadied. One by one, she lifted each piece out of the trunk, setting them on the bed like sacred relics being prepared for ceremony. The room grew darker as storm clouds gathered outside, and the air felt electric. The Reaper was stirring. As Sarah laid out the weapons and gear, the door creaked behind her. Reverend Wicks stood in the doorway, his hands folded before him, his eyes filled with both sorrow and understanding. For a long moment he said nothing, only watching her with the weight of a man who had seen too many funerals. "You knew this day might come," he said finally, his voice low and steady. Sarah didn't look up. She strapped the tactical vest over her chest, tightening the straps until they bit into her ribs. "I swore it never would." I told myself I would never be her again. Reverend Wicks stepped closer, his shoes soft against the floorboards. Her? You mean the Reaper, the name they gave you, the ghost you became. She slid the sidearm into its holster, the metal clicking into place like an old friend returning. That ghost nearly killed me. It took everything, my peace, my soul, my chance at a life. I walked away for a reason. Wicks placed a hand on the trunk, his weathered fingers brushing the fatigues that still bore her unit's number. His voice softened. You didn't walk away because you were weak. You walked away because you were strong enough to know there's more to life than war. But Sarah, love isn't weakness. Love is why you fight. Her movement slowed. She met his gaze, and for the first time since opening the trunk, her resolve wavered. You think love is enough to save her? Enough to stop Harley? Love is what keeps you human, Wicks said, his eyes fierce now. The Reaper, without love, is only death. But you, Sarah, you with love, you are justice. Don't mistake the two. She inhaled deeply, the weight of his words pressing into her chest. Justice. That was what she had always wanted. Not revenge, not glory. Justice. Outside, thunder rolled, shaking the walls. Rain began to streak down the window panes, the storm gathering its fury. Sarah strapped on her gloves, the leather molding to her hands as though it had been waiting for her return. She checked her knives, slid them into their sheaths, and finally slung the rifle over her shoulder. Wicks's expression shifted as he watched her transform. His lips moved in silent prayer, but his eyes never left her. You're not burying her anymore, he said quietly. You're bringing her back. Not because you want to, because you must. Sarah straightened, the gear heavy but familiar, grounding her in the body she thought she had left behind. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror leaning against the wall. For the first time in years, she saw not Sarah the aunt, not Sarah the survivor. She saw the Reaper. And she did not flinch. Lightning split the sky as Sarah stepped out onto the porch, the storm in full roar. Rain pelted down in sheets, plastering her hair to her face, but she didn't care. She moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had been here before, who knew what it meant to walk into hell prepared. Each piece of gear felt like a vow, the sidearm pressed against her hip, a reminder of every life she had once taken. The knives at her sides whispered of silent missions, choices no one else could make. The rifle across her back was weight and balance, both shield and sword. And above it all, the vest pressed against her chest like a second skin, carrying not only steel but also the names of the people she fought for now. Maya, Malcolm, Wicks, and every family displaced by Harley's greed. Malcolm stood under the eaves, his face pale as he took in her appearance. "You're really doing this?" he said, his voice more awe than fear. Sarah tightened the strap on her vest. There's no other way. Borer, still bruised from the rally, stepped forward, his eyes wide. "I've heard the stories," he murmured. "The Reaper? They said you were a ghost, that no one saw you coming until it was too late. I thought it was all rumor, but looking at you now, God help Harley." Sarah's eyes hardened. God won't help him, but I will end him. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof, the thunder rolling closer. Sarah turned her gaze toward the horizon, where she knew Harley was waiting. With Maya, the storm wasn't just weather. It was an omen, a mirror of the fury building in her chest. Reverend Wicks stepped out behind her, his Bible tucked under his arm, his voice raised over the thunder. "Remember what I told you. You are not death. You are justice. Do not forget who you are when the fire comes." Sarah gave him a single nod. Inside, the fear still lived, gnawing at her, whispering of failure. But above that fear rose something stronger, older, something forged in war and loss. The Reaper had always been there, waiting. Now she walked again. She adjusted her gloves, feeling the leather creak as her fists tightened. The rain slicked her gear, water dripping from her shoulders, but she moved without hesitation down the steps and into the storm. Every step echoed with resolve, every breath steadied into calm. Harley thought he had broken her by taking Maya. He thought he could corner her with grief, but he had only succeeded in summoning the one thing he could never defeat. The Reaper had returned, and this time she wasn't coming for war. She was coming for justice. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its rusted steel panels glowing faintly under the harsh glare of floodlights. Rain lashed the asphalt around it, pooling in wide slicks that reflected jagged streaks of lightning above. Sarah crouched low at the edge of the fence line, her body steady despite the storm, her breath controlled, her eyes narrowing as she studied the patterns of Harley's guards. She moved like a shadow. Each step was calculated, each pause purposeful. The Reaper was alive again, and every part of her body remembered its purpose. She slipped through the gap in the chain-link fence without a sound, the metal barely shifting against her weight. Ahead, two guards leaned against a truck, smoking and joking to themselves, their rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. Sarah's hand found the knife at her hip. She crept closer, boots silent on the soaked ground, until she was only a few feet away. In one swift motion, she lunged forward. The first guard didn't have time to gasp before the blade pressed against his throat, dropping him quietly. The second spun around in shock, reaching for his weapon, but Sarah's gloved fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the mud. She finished the job quickly, efficient and merciless. The storm masked the sound of their fall. She moved on, hugging the side of the warehouse, her eyes scanning for weaknesses in the defenses. A ladder led to an upper catwalk, and she scaled it with ease, her muscles remembering motions long denied. From above, she saw more guards patrolling the floor, men armed with pistols and batons, their eyes alert but their minds dulled by overconfidence. Sarah slipped inside through a broken window, the shadows swallowing her. She pulled a length of rusted chain from the floor, wrapping it around her forearm, turning it into a weapon. As one guard passed under her perch, she dropped silently, looping the chain around his throat, pulling him into unconsciousness before lowering him to the ground. Another came to investigate, and she used the first guard's pistol, taken cleanly from its holster, to silence him. One by one, she dismantled Harley's defenses, a phantom in the storm. The fear that once haunted her was gone, replaced by cold precision. Every takedown brought her closer to Maya, closer to ending Harley's reign. At last, she reached the central chamber. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and old wood. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting a dim circle of light on a crude iron cage. Inside, bruised and bound, sat Maya. Her hair clung to her damp cheeks, her wrists raw from rope, but her eyes burned with defiance even through the pain. Sarah's chest tightened. She rushed forward, gripping the bars of the cage. "Maya," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time all night. "Aunt Sarah," Maya rasped, her lips trembling but her spirit unbroken. "I knew you'd come." Sarah's hands worked the lock, her teeth clenched against the surge of emotion threatening to undo her. "I'm getting you out of here." But before she could break the latch, a slow, mocking clap echoed through the shadows. Harley stepped into the light. He looked different now, less like a man, more like the embodiment of every wound he had inflicted. His uniform was unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a baton dangled loosely from his hand. His eyes glittered with something between triumph and madness, his smirk cruel as ever. "Well, well," Harley drawled, his voice dripping venom. "The ghost herself. I wondered if you'd crawl out of hiding when I dangled the bait, and here you are." Sarah turned slowly to face him, her body positioning itself between him and the cage. "Let her go, Harley. This ends tonight." He laughed, a deep and ugly sound that filled the room. "Oh, it ends tonight, all right, but not the way you think. You've haunted this town long enough, playing the savior. but you're nothing without blood on your hands. You can't save her without becoming what you fear most." The words sliced close to the bone, but Sarah stood firm. She drew her sidearm, her aim steady on his chest. "Try me." Harley twirled the baton lazily, his grin widening. "Come on then, show me the reaper they whisper about, or are you still hiding behind justice and prayer?" He lunged without warning, swinging the baton at her head. Sarah ducked, driving her shoulder into his ribs, the impact sending him stumbling back. He roared and drew a pistol from his belt, firing wildly. Sarah rolled behind a stack of crates, bullets splintering wood above her. She fired back, forcing him into cover. The warehouse echoed with gunfire, shouts, and the crash of collapsing metal. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off pipes, the storm outside rumbling in answer. Sarah moved with brutal efficiency, closing the distance until Harley dropped his empty gun and came at her with the baton again. They collided in the center of the room. His strength was raw, brutal, fueled by rage and desperation. Hers was precise, honed by years of training and loss. Every strike rattled through her bones, but every counterattack carried the weight of someone who refused to lose. Harley slammed the baton across her jaw, knocking her back against the cage. Maya screamed from inside, her fists pounding the bars. Sarah spat blood, her vision swimming, but she caught his next strike, twisting the baton from his grip and slamming it into his knee. He howled, collapsing to one side. She pounced, fists raining down, years of fury exploding in each blow. Her knuckles split, her chest heaved, and with every strike she came closer to finishing him for good. Harley's face turned to a swollen mask, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with fear for the first time. Her hand went for the knife at her belt, lifting it high. She could end him right here, right now, erase his corruption in one stroke. But then Maya's voice cut through the haze. "Sarah, don't. That's not you." Her arm trembled, the blade hovering inches from Harley's throat. He laughed weakly, blood dripping from his mouth. "Do it. Prove me right. Show her who you really are." Sarah froze. Her chest rose and fell, her heart hammering, the storm raging outside like a mirror of her inner war. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the blade. "No," she whispered. "I'm not you." Harley staggered back, his laugh faltering, confusion flickering in his bruised eyes. What are you doing?" Sarah shoved him against the cage, pinning him there with cold precision. "I'm ending this, but not the way you think. You'll answer for everything you've done. Not in shadows, not in silence, but in front of everyone you've hurt." From the corner of the cage, Maya shifted, her eyes flashing with determination. Despite her bruises, she had kept the small device Sarah had given her days earlier, tucked into her sleeve for safety. With a trembling but steady hand, she activated it. A faint blue light glowed as the device went live, connecting to the feeds Sarah and Roar had rigged across multiple networks. The sound of the storm, the crackle of Harley's breath, the raw tremor in Sarah's voice, it was all transmitted in real time. Across town, in homes, in bars, in quiet kitchens, where families whispered in fear of Harley's name, screens flickered to life. Phones buzzed with notifications. The people of the city, for the first time, were seeing the truth unfold. Sarah shoved Harley to his knees, gripping his collar so he faced the camera. "Look at them," she hissed. "Every family you stole from, every protester you silenced, every life you thought you owned. They're watching now. Tell them the truth." Harley spat blood, shaking his head. "I'll never." Sarah tightened her grip, pressing the blade against his cheek just enough to draw a thin line of red. "You will, or I will drag you through every detail myself." Maya's voice rose, clear despite her exhaustion. "Everyone is watching, Harley. You can't hide anymore." The camera's red light blinked steadily, unrelenting. Harley's breathing quickened. The walls he had built, the lies he had spun, all began to crack under the weight of exposure. He glanced at the lens, then back at Sarah, his bravado faltering. "They'll never believe you," he muttered. "They already do," Sarah said, her voice cutting through like steel. For the first time, Harley's eyes showed fear. Not of Sarah's fists, not of her blade, but of the people now seeing him stripped bare. His power had always thrived in secrecy, in silence, and now both were gone. Finally, with a shuddering breath, he spoke. "Fine. I did it. All of it. The raids, the seizures, the arrests, the deals with the developers. I built this city on their backs and laughed while they broke." His words spilled out, venomous but undeniable. "And you, every one of you watching, you couldn't stop me." But Sarah leaned closer, her voice low and final, "Until now." The live stream captured every word. Gasps echoed in living rooms, anger surged in crowded bars, and across the city, people who had been silent found their voices. Harley's confession was the crack that split the dam wide open. Maya leaned against the bars, tears cutting through the grime on her cheeks. "You did it, Aunt Sarah. They see him for what he really is." Sarah's grip loosened on Harley's collar, letting him collapse to the floor. The fight was over, but the war for justice had just begun. The storm outside thundered as if in approval, rain hammering against the warehouse roof. Sarah holstered her knife, her chest heaving, her gaze steady. The Reaper had returned to deliver justice, not with death, but with truth. The warehouse storm passed, but the echoes of Harley's downfall spread like ripples across the city. In the days that followed, televisions, phones, and radios replayed his trembling confession again and again. For a community long silenced, it was the sound of shackles breaking. Families who had hidden in fear stepped into the streets with renewed strength, and neighbors who had once passed each other without a word now found themselves embracing. At the heart of the renewal was the church basement. What once served as a quiet place for Bible study became the nerve center of rebirth. Folding tables were pushed together, laptops lined the surfaces, and the smell of coffee and old hymnals mixed with the electric charge of hope. The very walls that had held whispered prayers now carried the bold laughter of people planning a new future. Malcolm was there, sleeves rolled up, showing groups of young men and women how to shield themselves in the digital age. He mapped out firewalls and secure networks on chalkboards, breaking down the technical language into terms anyone could grasp. "The fight doesn't just happen on the street anymore," he said, pointing to a screen. "It happens here, in the code, in the systems they use to track us. Learn this and you take away their eyes." Roar, with her unshakable fire, gathered others in a circle and taught them how to navigate the legal battlefield. She held up papers filled with statutes and case precedents, explaining how rights had been twisted against the people and how to twist them back. "Knowledge is power," she declared. "If they know the law better than we do, they win. But if we claim it, they lose their grip." Maya, still bearing the bruises of her captivity but walking taller than ever, led a group of teenagers. They sat in a ring, wide-eyed as she spoke. "You're the future," she told them, her voice steady. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young to fight for justice. I thought I was powerless once, but I was wrong. You can be louder, smarter, and braver than those who try to hold you down." The young people nodded, some with tears shining in their eyes. For many, this was the first time they had seen someone so close to their age stand in front of them not as a victim, but as a leader. Maya's words wove themselves into their hearts, planting seeds of courage that would grow in ways even she could not yet imagine. The church basement became more than a meeting space. It became the heartbeat of the neighborhood. Flyers covered the bulletin board, self-defense classes, literacy workshops, voter registration drives. Where there had once been despair, now there was organization. Where there had once been silence, now there was song. And through it all, Sarah stood at the edge of the room, watching the transformation she had helped ignite. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than rage, stronger than guilt. She felt peace. Sarah returned to her garden in the early mornings, long before the city awoke. The soil was damp beneath her gloves, the earth rich with promise. Rows of collards, beans, and tomatoes stretched across the lot, and in the cool dawn air, the leaves shimmered with dew. Children from the block had begun planting beside her, and what started as a solitary refuge had become a communal space. It was no longer just Sarah's garden, it was the neighborhood's. Mothers came with baskets, elders shared recipes, and children laughed as they pulled carrots from the dirt like buried treasure. The act of tending the soil, once her private meditation, had become a symbol of the community's healing. Sarah knelt by a row of beans, pulling weeds, when Reverend Wicks appeared at the gate. His old Bible was tucked beneath his arm, and his face was lit with a quiet pride. "You see," he said, stepping inside, "life comes back when love waters it." She smiled faintly, wiping her brow. "I thought I was done fighting. I thought burying the Reaper would give me peace." "And yet," Wicks said, kneeling beside her, "peace isn't found in hiding. It's found in balance. You're both the soldier and the gardener. One fights, the other heals. Together, they make you whole." Sarah looked across the lot, watching as children raced between the rows. She remembered the weight of the tactical vest, the sting of blood on her hands, and then she remembered Maya's smile as she spoke to the youth in the basement. Wicks's words settled in her chest like truth she had always known but never named. Later that evening, Sarah sat on her porch, the sun dipping low behind the houses. Maya came to sit beside her, her posture straighter, her eyes brighter than ever. "They're listening to me now," she said softly. "The kids, the neighbors, they're actually listening." Sarah turned, studying her niece's face. "You've become more than I ever could have hoped." Maya shook her head. "I learned from you, from your strength." "No," Sarah said, her voice low but certain. "You're stronger than I ever was. I fought because I had no choice. You fight because you choose to." The words carried weight, a passing of more than praise. It was the passing of a torch. For the first time in decades, Sarah saw that her legacy was not only in the battles she had fought, but in the new leader rising beside her. Maya reached for her hand, and together they watched the neighborhood children chasing fireflies as night fell. In their laughter, Sarah heard the sound of a future worth guarding. Weeks later, the city pulsed with change. Harley's confession had led to indictments, trials, and reforms that once seemed impossible. Yet Sarah knew better than to think the battle was over. Injustice had a way of hiding, of waiting, of returning when vigilance waned. She sat in her garden one quiet afternoon, trimming the last of the summer squash. The sun hung low, casting a warm glow over the rows of green. Her hands were steady, her heart calmer than it had been in years. Peace was here, yes, but so was readiness. The Reaper had not vanished. She had simply learned to rest when the time was right. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She pulled it from her pocket, expecting a neighbor or Maya. Instead, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, edged with urgency. "Sarah Connor?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Deputy Chief Lawson from Chicago. We seen what you did there, what you exposed. We need your help. Our city is drowning in the same corruption you just burned out. Will you come?" Sarah's eyes drifted over her garden. Children's laughter echoed in the distance as they played near the fence. The beans she had planted weeks earlier climbed tall, their vines reaching toward the sky. She felt the tug of two worlds, the desire to remain in peace and the knowledge that peace demanded protection. Kaylin commanded protection. She stood slowly, gazing at the horizon, where the sun melted into the skyline. The phone was still pressed to her ear, but her thoughts reached farther. Chicago, another city in need, another battlefield calling. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, with a steady voice, she answered, "Tell me where to begin." The call ended, leaving silence behind. Sarah lowered the phone, her gaze returning to the rows of vegetables swaying gently in the breeze. The garden was not abandoned. Maya was here now, guiding the community, nurturing the seeds Sarah had planted in both soil and spirit. The torch had been passed. Sarah exhaled, a slow breath that carried both sorrow and strength. The Reaper's mission had grown beyond her own wounds, beyond her own city. She was no longer just a survivor, no longer just a fighter. She was part of something larger, a movement that stretched across cities, across people, across time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah lifted her eyes one last time to the glowing sky. The fight was not over, it never would be, but she was ready. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled once again.